Hey everyone, and welcome back to my channel. So today's video will be short and sweet. I'm going to be talking about ISO and explaining how you can select the most appropriate ISO for your situation, because it's definitely going to be one of the main pillars of taking a successful photo. So when I started dabbling in film photography myself, I was a little overwhelmed by the immense amount of film stock that I had at my disposal. I was thinking, can't you just shoot with any film stock? And unfortunately, no, not if you want a good, correctly exposed result. So the number one question you should be asking when selecting your film stock is, what am I going to be shooting and how do I correctly pick my ISO for these conditions? So since different film stocks will be more or less appropriate for different light conditions, this is going to significantly narrow down your film stock choice. So what is ISO? ISO is your measurement for film speed. The lower your ISO, the lower your film speed. So how will film speed impact your photos? A slower film speed means that your film stock is less sensitive to light, so it will need more light to properly expose your shot. On the other hand, a faster film with a higher ISO will be more sensitive to light. This means that you can get away with lower light conditions. Film stock ISO can go as low as 20, but the widely available commercial range at your local store will more likely begin at around 100 ISO. For example, this little guy has been hanging out in my fridge for a while. It is a 100 ISO Washi X film, and I'm definitely waiting for a very bright sunny day to go and shoot this one, because if the light conditions aren't perfect, it is going to be very rough to get a decent shot. More commonly, you will also find 200 ISO films, for example the staple Kodak Gold. It is still going to require good light conditions, but it will be more forgiving than a 100 ISO film. As we climb up the ISO ladder, we're going to get to the 400 ISO film, which is probably going to be the best film for you to shoot as a beginner. It's going to be much more versatile and it's going to be able to handle an overcast day and maybe even some indoor photography. In this category, you will find the Kodak Ultramax, Kodak Portra, the Fuji Xperia, and many more. From 800 ISO and upward, your film is going to be fast enough for low light situations. I rarely do night photography myself, but when I did, I used the Cinestill 800. I made a video about it and it performed really well. 800 ISO is also going to be your safest bet for indoor photography. Now, ISOs don't stop there. You have some super fast films above 800. You can find film stocks with 3200 ISO, for example. And you can also push process your film to these levels. I'm going to talk about that a little later. But with all of these ISO values on the market, you might be asking yourself, why don't I just go with the highest ISO available and then shoot all of my photos with that? That way I'm sure that I won't be lacking any light in any situation. Well, unfortunately, it's not that simple. Because the more you increase your ISO, the more you will also increase the grain in your photographs. So you will be sacrificing your image quality the higher you go on the ISO scale. Now, ISO is not a concept unique to film photography. You also set your ISO in digital photography. However, when shooting film, it might be a little more of an obstacle, because the film you end up loading into your camera, you're pretty much going to be stuck with for however many exposures it has. While in digital cameras, you can switch your ISO from photo to photo. So when you're shooting analog, you better understand ISO and have a plan when you're loading that film into your camera. I know, life is unpredictable and different situations call for different settings. So fortunately, you can slightly adapt your ISO in camera if the box speed isn't cutting it. So in these scenarios, as I mentioned, you can push or you can pull your film in camera based on the light sensitivity you need in the moment. You can do this by adjusting your ISO wheel. That's the wheel that you're going to be using when you load your film to let your camera know what kind of ISO it's going to be working with. So to push and pull your film in camera, you're going to select the ISO you want instead of the recommended box speed. That way your camera is going to treat your film stock as if it has the ISO that you have selected on your wheel, even if it's not the case. So if your light conditions are not ideal, you can always push your ISO a little bit and help out your film stock. On the other hand, you can also pull faster film stock to a lower ISO, providing that you have enough light. I like doing that from time to time because it does help increase the detail in your photos and it minimizes noise as well. So most SLR cameras will have this wheel in some shape or another, and some newer cameras are also able to read the film stock's barcode and determine the ISO based on that, but you can always decide to push and pull it. When developing your photos, it might be a good idea to let your lab know if you've pushed or pulled the film, because it might impact the way they are going to treat it. Now, with all this being said, you might be wondering, well, can't I just darken or brighten my photos in Lightroom or whatever app I'm using? And to a certain extent, Sure, you can, especially when it comes to darkening. However, if you don't have the appropriate ISO when first shooting your image, then it might be a very big challenge to be able to brighten it. This is especially true in film photography. If you try to brighten a photo which has been underexposed when taken, then you will be sacrificing a lot of the image's quality, and you're also very unlikely to get good, if any, detail in your shadows and in the darker portions of your image, because they wouldn't have been captured to begin with. So despite us all being able to tweak our image a little bit in post-processing, it is always better to start off with a correctly exposed photo. Trust me, it's gonna make your life so much easier. To a certain extent, you might also be able to compensate your ISO with aperture and with shutter speed. If you're in a situation with low light, a wider aperture as well as a slower shutter speed are going to allow more light to enter. This is also going to be a little trickier, especially with the shutter speed, because the slower it is, the more prone your photograph is going to be to blur, unless of course you have a tripod or something to stabilize your camera. So with all of this, the idea is for you to give yourself the best possible conditions to take a photograph. And an appropriate ISO is definitely a major one. You can compensate for its shortcomings slightly, but at the end of the day, it could really be what is going to make or break your photograph. So it's definitely worth making yourself familiar with it, experimenting with it, and understanding what kind of effect the ISO has on your photograph. With this, I hope that my explanation of ISO was clear, and please let me and everybody know in the comments if you have any tips or tricks for ISO. And most importantly, I hope you have a really great day, and I hope to see you soon in the next video. Take care of yourselves, and bye-bye.